Wendy Snyder is a mom of two, certified parenting educator, and family life coach who inspires parents to learn and grow through connection based on positive parenting strategies. As the host of the Fresh Start Family Show and founder of FreshStartFamilyOnline.com, she helps parents ditch the threats, yelling, and harsh punishments so they can live life as a joyful and confident parent with kids that listen and cooperate great. Families who take part in her learning and coaching programs experience radical shifts in their hearts, minds, and souls that help them to create rock solid relationships with their kids while at the same time teaching important life lessons and helping to raise the next generation of leaders, change makers, and important human souls. Hi, Wendy. I'm so excited to chat with you today.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be with you.
Awesome. So, my first question has to do with parenting sentiment. You're a parenting coach, as we talked about. According to Pew Research, two-thirds of parents say parenting is harder today than it was 20 years ago. Many are citing technologies like social media or smartphones as a reason. In August of 2024, the Surgeon General's latest advisory stated that parental stress is a significant public health issue. So, what do you think has changed in modern parenting that makes it so hard?
Mm. Yeah, this is an interesting question. I've heard this type of question get posed about our world quite often, and it's not always that it's always true, right? Like we may feel like it's harder now than it was in the past, and it's hard to compare what's actual truth there, right? Because parents who were growing up during the Great Depression, right? Who's to say like that us thinking it's harder now really compares to what they thought was hard? So it's kind of like but I know what parents are talking about. It sure feels harder, right? And yes, absolutely. The screens are a big part of that. And really, when I think of the screens, I think of not just helping our children navigate life as a human being with screens. I was just at Disneyland with my little girl who's almost 17 a few weeks ago, and the amount of kids in strollers on screens or at dinner next to a roller coaster and a pond, like, um, Disneyland Lake with on a screen eating meals was like, wow, this is very different than even just 3 years ago. So
Yeah.
managing the kids is for sure, that's a lot. But I really think that the humans are all human souls are now becoming very affected by our cumulative kind of dopamine addiction to these devices and living a way where if you're waiting for a train, going to the bathroom, standing in line to get a coffee, like we are not having very much rest time at all because everyone's optimizing their life constantly. They're getting back to the text. They're entertaining themselves instead of being bored and watching the tree sway in the wind. And so I do think that it is affecting our soul. And so that makes sense why it would lead to a more stressed out parent. And then you add on to that we're managing the consistent begging for technology that our kids get really young because of the culture they're growing up into. That I think all of those things probably make it a lot harder. And then the expansion of information that's now so readily available through these devices and the internet, I think has also caused us to become more helicopter parenting ish.
Mm.
I actually just interviewed a really incredible expert that was so inspiring. Her name's Lenore Skenazy from Let Grow. She might be a great interview for you guys, but their work really talks about how the constraints have come in hardcore with the kids since the expansion of information has grew, right? So now we might see that there was a kid kidnapped in Kansas, like
Yeah.
20 minutes, 2 hours after it happened. And then we become so fearful that we then put trackers on our kids and they lose a lot of the independence that is part of normal child development. And that comes into misbehavior and pushing back and then not growing the life skills that they actually need to have self-control and do all these things. So those are just some of my thoughts. Who knows? None of us know. But I
Yeah.
think I can see with my own two eyes, and I'm no neuroscientist, that those are things that are affecting humanity.
Yeah, I mean, that was an amazing list. And two things stood out to me. One was that you made the point that maybe it just feels more overwhelming. And I do agree with that. And part of that is the information overload. and the surveillance parenting, which is the term we use to describe what you were
Mm,
talking about, the GPS tracking, logging into your
yeah.
kids' portal to oversee their homework. Not to mention, like, we
Yep.
used to, as a society, kick our kids out in the morning and then have them come back at dinner, right? And they were
Yeah.
raised by communities, and, we just weren't around them so much. We weren't expected to be there for every elite sports game or help them with all their homework. We just had so much more support and less time with the kids. There's actually a statistic. I'm going to misquote it, but it's something like the average working parent, doesn't matter if it's a mother, father, whatever, spends more time with their kids than a 50s housewife. And I mean,
That's crazy.
you touched on many of the issues, but I do agree that I do think some of it is a perception, right? Whether that
Yeah.
is feeling overwhelmed because you have more time, no time, because you talked about us as parents constantly checking in and managing or everything else. Plus, this idea of the surveillance parenting, where we're feeling like we have to constantly helicopter and monitor. So I do think
Yeah.
those are really, really important points that you brought up. I don't know if you have anything else to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, hey, and no shame. Like it's just we're
Yeah.
all trying to figure it out, right? But I think the top of the list for me really, I mean, it's all of it equally, but it's that the devices, the personal devices is really an interesting conversation for me. And it seems to me in my life, the one that I'm trying to get the most support and have intention with. And I will tell you that it is a very intense journey because that addiction is strong and I can tell that it's affecting my brain. And I know when I go on vacation and I'm not on a device for the week, but I'm like noticing and have my feet in nature more and I'm always present with conversations versus juggling, I feel like a different person.
Yeah.
And so that's really at the top of my list.
Yeah, for sure.
But I'm a
Uh,
big work in progress.
Yeah, we all are. I mean, nobody's
Yeah.
perfect and we're all working on it. Every family's struggling. You and I had this conversation before we
Yes.
recorded. So let's jump to off of that a little bit and talk about the parent-child relationship. So how do you see modern screen technology, so whether that's smartphones or social media or anything else, affecting that child-parent relationship in your coaching practice?
Yeah. So I think that feeling of overwhelm is very present for most of my families. And again, I'm often like we do work obviously I mean I'm a parenting coach. We work with the kids and their behavior quite often, but we often, most often go and look at what is our habits first and foremost. And so the overwhelm that a lot of our parents are feeling is often from and almost overexposure to information
Yeah,
and like higher demands than ever, thinking that just because you are aware of all this that you're then supposed to perfectly be implementing everything instead of really
yeah,
consciously and intentionally choosing one mentor and program to really spend a season building out skills around, right? A lot of modern day parents are just trying to do it all, and so I think that can cause to problems, lead to problems. And then I think when it comes to the parent-child relationship, if a parent isn't really set up for success on how to set firm limits and boundaries and know the yes behind their no with children when it comes to technology, there is so much room for disruption and chaos in the home. And that is going to cause major disruptions in the relationship, which in our work, that is, we teach powerful parenting, which is relationship based, firm and kind parenting strategies. And it is really all like the power we have as parents is most significantly tied to the strength of our relationship with our children. And so if we are consistently using threats and bribes and rewards, especially with technology to get our kids to comply, or we're moving to overpowering strategies and punishment strategies, most of the time for modern day families, that's going to include technology. The tears in the relationship are just constantly happening. And then on top of that, you have oftentimes before parents get into the type of work where they're changing the dynamics, but they often have a lot of hypocrisy going on, right? So they might
yeah,
be really annoyed that a kid is addicted to their phone or begging to get on the video games or begging for this access to this device. And then they're not really quite understanding yet of how to have awareness around their own behavior, and that they're modeling the behavior that they don't want their children to repeat, right? We know that most of our children's behavior is caught, not taught. And
Yeah.
so, and that really, especially for strong-willed kids, I help a lot of parents with strong-willed kids because they are the highest degree of difficulty. And strong-willed kids are like hypocrisy drug sniffing dogs. If there is hypocrisy, they will sniff it out and they will raise the red flag, and no amount of punishment or lecturing or threatening or bribing will make them change, because they just, they see through it, and they're just really good mirrors. They'll mimic stuff really easily. So that's
Mhm.
important when it comes to relationship, especially around screens and tech, to make sure that we see this as a journey together. And we're all figuring this out, right? The iPhone just came out, what was it, like 25 years ago or something?
2007, and it really didn't get widely adopted till 2008.
Okay.
Nothing.
So yeah. So almost 18 or something, 18 years, but we're all just figuring this out together. Our children pretty much are the first generation raised in
Mhm.
this personal device technology. So if we can see it as we're together and we're all learning the life skills, then I think it helps with the relationship then, versus just, and learning different ways, right? Like versus I know what we might chat about threats and bribery, but all that kind of stuff will affect their relationship. And in the end, misbehavior will rise when the relationship strength goes down.
Yeah, it's also true. We also talk a lot about modeling, and it's one area that I think it's kind of a hard pill to swallow for parents, right? That they need to
Yeah.
model the behavior they want to see, especially when it comes to their devices. There are studies that show there's a direct correlation. It seems kind of obvious, but it is supported by research too, that there's a direct correlation between problematic use in adults and their kids. I mean, it makes sense, and it's based on modeling and other factors too, but primarily kids are you had such a great way of phrasing it, but they're looking at you, right? Like it doesn't matter what you say, they're watching your behavior to know how to behave. And then I
Yeah.
wanted to push on boundaries a little bit more too, because it's the number one thing. I've spoken to many parenting coaches in this journey, and it's kind of the number one thing that I think keeps coming up. And I think my insight, and I don't know how you feel about this, but I think it's something that parents have a really hard time doing, in this generation for some reason. So maybe would you mind giving your tips? Like, how can parents successfully create boundaries? Let's state a technology right now surrounding technology and screen time. How can they do that?
Oh my gosh, it is a beast right now, because those of us who are choosing to do it differently, you are the outcast for sure, right? And I
Yeah.
think so much of doing parenting in any different way, it's learning to become comfortable being uncomfortable, like being the
Mhm.
outcast, right? And when you're practicing firm and kind connection-based parenting, you will be the outcast. So we're in San Diego, California, big city here in the US, and my kids are almost 14, almost 17, and 9 out of 10 of their friends had iPhones, untethered access to the internet and iPhones since the age of 10. 9 out of 10 of them are still like in the traditional punishment homes, traditional threats, punishment, bribery, rewards, disconnected relationships. Like it's just kind of the way it is, like untethered access to the internet. And then you've got these kids in a family where they weren't allowed to have an iPhone till high school, and no violent video games and no technology in the bedroom. And it's just like, oh my gosh, this is intense, because that feels really, I think, dangerous, right? When you're a parent and your nervous system is like, oh my gosh, my kid's going to be made fun of. My kid's
Yeah.
not going to fit in. Maybe it isn't really a big deal. How am I going to contact them if I'm late for sports practice, pickup, or whatever? And there's just a lot of like danger alarms that go off for parents. And so it feels like the nervous system, I think, pushes us back to our comfort zone of just,
Mhm.
you know, it's okay. Like this makes sense, right? Like it's a phone, it's a device. It's no big deal almost, because we want to avoid those things. But really, setting the firm boundaries with the technology, in my opinion, is one of the most important things that parents learn how to do, because it really has such a significant effect on their mental health. I know in our town here in San Diego, I mean, my daughter goes to not a huge high school, but last year we had 3 suicides in 6 months in her high
Yeah.
school. She's got friends who are cutting definitely some suicidal ideation stuff, struggling, like just massive drugs, alcohol stuff, which was common in our age too. Like I was definitely not a sober kid in high school, but you can just see it so clearly that kids are struggling. And so I just encourage the boundary thing so much. So we here at Fresh Start Family, we love to teach a little formula that helps you remember 4 steps. We teach this inside of our mini course called the Firm and Kind Parenting Blueprint. I can give you a link for parents to check that out. But the first step is just make strong agreements, and they have to be rooted in actual agreements versus compliance statements. And that means you have to do your education and your research to help your child understand why you have such a firm boundary around whether it's no technology in the bedroom or we're going to wait for high school to get a phone or whatever it may be. You've got to be able to help them understand why it's a good idea for them, right? Yeah. And so from a very young age, Stella was begging, Mama, please, 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 please. And I had the honor of telling her over and over again that here's the statistics. You will have friends in high school who start cutting. You will lose friends to suicide. And we're here, right? So she's a junior. And sure enough, right? Like I hate that that's true, but I got to help her understand that we cared more about her mental health than her like loving our boundaries and our rules, right? Like that was the most priority. And that agreement, which is the first part of our 4-step Firm and Kind process, set us up for success when it was time to then, when she would beg, push, come on, Mom, we would just go to empathy, which is the second step. Like, no wonder you want this. Like everyone on the block has violent video games in their garage with untethered access. No wonder. Of course, like I can see how fun it is to play Fortnite. Like, no wonder. And our firm rule is like our family value is that we're just not down with pretend murder practice, right? Like however you want to describe whatever your rule is. That's empathy, but you really have to learn to connect and see it from your kids' eyes and just help them understand they're not crazy. They're not an alien. They're not the worst kid for wanting it. Of course they want it. They're entrenched in it. It makes sense. And then the third step is to engage their critical thinking skills, which is to help them remember the agreement that your family has in place that, everyone made in a calm time. Because when we make agreements in calm times, we are more rooted and it makes more sense to us. And then you move to empowerment prompting strategies, which is just giving them options and choices on how they want to move forward. That still, is going to respect the rule, and they get to show up how they want. Just, for Stella, it was like, okay, so do you want to have a Trumi phone? I think it was Trumi or Gab at the time we had for her. Would you like a Trumi phone, or would you just like to roll like nothing? And she actually chose to have nothing. Like she's always been my kid who's like high level embarrassment. She just didn't want she thought it was too kiddish. She had one that she would take to sleepover as a Trumi phone, but or I know you've had Titania on. I love Bark too, but she had the choice, and she would choose, no, I'm not going to take it on the volleyball bus. I'm just going to be like, no, I don't have one. Right. But like, there's a lot of different choices we can give kids as that 4th step on what they want to do. Do you want to plug it in here outside your room in the charging dock, or do you want to plug it downstairs, right? Like, do you want me to plug it in, or do you want to plug it in? But that 4-step process that we teach in our Firm and Kind Parenting Blueprint, if parents can kind of memorize that and get into the rhythm, then it becomes easier to just be like, here's my no. And we're going to do it in a connected way, versus most parents are moving towards do it or else it's going to get taken away for good.
Yeah.
Do it or else you're going to get a timeout. Do it or else. And it's just threat after threat after threat, which will cause massive tears in the relationship, which eventually misbehavior will go up. And then in the second decade, you really lose the kid, because a lot of kids just end up not giving a, and they'll just, they become really good at hiding things. They get burner phones, so.
Wow. I love that. I would love to share a link to that, because it's just so practical.
Yeah.
And it seems like, because full disclosure, I didn't know this before talking to you, but you and I are in lockstep with the rules. My kids are 8 and 11, but they won't have a smartphone until high school. My son actually doesn't have anything yet. He's one of the last kids. We don't do Apple Watch or anything. And
Good.
for me, it comes from a place of, and we also are more positive parenting, by the way. But for me, it
Nice.
comes from the place of tech. So to me, these are adult products, and even an Apple Watch is a accessory to an iPhone, and it's not really designed to be used alone. You can, and of course, it is better than a full smartphone. But in our family, we also think a lot about resilience, and this is something I talk to my son about. I'm like, I want you to figure stuff out on your own. I don't want you to
Yeah.
text every little question you have or every little thing that goes wrong. And you're never in a place where you're not without an adult. So I just don't see, a need for this. I've actually talked to other therapists that have said, there's actually never a need. They kind of push back on me
Yeah.
about that. And that was interesting too. But for me, just practically, like, I just don't see a need to even open up that door. And like, small story, so we always make a plan. And I think that teaches good skills too about pickup, because you mentioned that. And that's one of the things that parents like is the convenience. But we will make a plan. We'll say, okay, I'm going to be here at this time, this place, and I'll even say, hey, any issues, go talk to this person or that person, and we'll really talk it out. The other day, took him to tennis practice, and me and him always have a plan where we're going to be, where I'm going to be, because he's off on his own for a few hours. My
Yeah.
husband took him that one day and they forgot to make the plan. So sure enough, they couldn't find each other. He was sitting in the parking lot for about 10-15 minutes. It was starting to get dark. He started to get very worried.
Yeah.
And of course, my husband showed up, everything was fine, but it was a great teachable moment where I could say, what was it that we had talked about? Like, if you couldn't find us. And he's like, oh yeah, I go to the pro shop and ask. And he was fine. He was in a country club for 10 or 15 minutes by himself.
Yes.
But even those little things, I think, help build that resilience to make a competent adult later on. So we didn't talk about resilience, but I just wanted to throw that in there because that's one of my reasons.
Yeah.
Wait.
That is exactly Lenore Skenazy's work with Let Grow, because
Oh,
she's,
cool.
I mean, it happened a long time ago. It was like, I think 30 years ago, but she got very famous. I guess she was named like the world's worst mom in New York City because she put her kid on the subway alone.
Uh-huh.
And I think he was 8 or 10 because he
Yeah.
really wanted to. He wanted to find his way home to Brooklyn. And she was like, cool. And she was like, okay, see you later. And he did it. It took him a few hours. He got lost, but he found his way home.
Yep.
And I mean, I guess back then it was newspapers and things, but it kind of blew up. And that was, I think, the beginning of her founding that nonprofit organization. But it is very true what you're talking about. And they have the statistics to show that that is actually what helps children grow and
Yeah.
thrive,
Yeah.
is those situations. So yeah, once my daughter did get the iPhone, and before she started driving, I would crack up because I'd be 3 minutes late. I'm like a chronic 3 minute later, and she
Yeah.
would bring me like a 5:02, and I would just be like, Stella, I'm
Yeah.
coming. Like,
Yeah.
it's turned into now, once they have those devices, it's like, Mom, where are you? And it's like,
Yeah.
once it's there, it just takes away that ability to just be in the uncomfortable waiting, which is good for a human
Yeah.
soul.
Yeah. And I feel like other parents think I'm insane, but I'll tell them, I'm like, I don't want him to contact me. I don't think he knows
Yes,
when it's appropriate or how frequent is appropriate or, any of that. I haven't taught
you're
him
spot
screen time.
on.
So, so we're good for now. But quick
Yeah.
question before we move on: is your daughter thanking you yet? Your 17-year-old
You
year old?
know, she hasn't, my little strong-willed sweet girl. I think she said once. She said the closest she came, I know she will one day, but the
Yeah.
closest she came was she said to me one day, I see what you were talking about, Mom.
Yes.
I see
Yeah.
what you were talking about. It was a few years ago now, but she did say, I see what you're talking about as far as
Yeah.
the addiction goes. Like
Yep.
we talk so much about, you're going to notice that your friends are unable to be in a car ride, or
Yeah.
and yes, that's what it was, because it was when she was doing indoor volleyball, they would take water breaks, and
Hmm.
her friends who had the devices, they couldn't go get water without checking their
Totally.
socials.
Yeah.
And that's when she noticed and said to me, Mama, I see what you're talking. I see. And that
Yeah.
was like the closest she's come to being like, Mama, you're right. But she's my strong-willed one. It'll probably take
Yeah.
her till like maybe on her wedding day.
You will get it eventually. And I'm starting to see
Yeah.
that already with my son too, because he's hyper aware, because he knows all of it, because of my background. So he's starting to see things in his
Yeah.
friends or things that are popping up already at age 11. So it will
Wow.
happen.
Yeah.
No parent has ever wished they did it sooner, and no kid has ever wished that. Like Gen Z
Yeah.
adults, actually, if you look at the statistics, they actually wish this stuff didn't exist. They wish they didn't have it as kids, right? So
Yeah.
they will thank you later. Nobody wishes they'd done it sooner or younger or more. It's always the
It's
other way
true.
around. So,
Yep. You
um,
just got to get through that uncomfortable season and know that you're not crazy. You got to find this community and
yeah,
know that there are so many people who are doing it. They just might not be in your
yeah,
elementary school, your middle school, your town, but that we
yeah,
are here and we are strong.
yep,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, well, I feel like we've covered this a little bit, and I'm going to rephrase my question because I was going to ask you about if parents should use rewards and punishments, but I know the answer is no. So I'm going to ask you,
Yeah.
why shouldn't parents use rewards and punishments for behavior? Why shouldn't they use dangle tech in front of their kids for rewards and punishments?
Yeah. Well, I think when it comes to technology, I mean, I wish if I had a magic genie wand, I just wish that it was like illegal for kids to have any type of like personal device that is able to go out into the world till after high school, right? Like,
Mhm.
so the fact that they even have them in high school, I mean, it's better that many of us are waiting, but even then it becomes pretty intense what they have to learn as far as management goes. And so we do know that they are children of the technological age. They need the life skill to be able to manage and self-control, all the things that come, self-regulation when it comes to technology and management and dopamine addictions and all the things. So when they're in our house, we do want to create a healthy conversation around technology. And as soon as it becomes this thing that we're using to hurt and harm our kids, which really is just what punishment is, like that is the classic way, is when a child makes a mistake, most parents, we are conditioned, many of us, because of the way we were raised, that in order to teach a child to behave better, you must first make them feel worse. And so we do what we think will sting the worst. And so we actually, if we're being honest, we know that the addiction starts very young with these children when they're given these devices, whether it's an iPad or an iPhone. And so when we yank that thing away, it is the tear that happens in a relationship and also to a child's spirit and soul is pretty gnarly. And so I am just here to teach parents that they have so many different options. Punishment in general, we just teach a totally different way. We teach
Yeah.
logical consequences, natural consequences, and it's just so cool because it'll actually bring you closer together with your kids. But we want to be teaching life skills, not that something is bad, wrong, or why you should feel bad about what you did. And so when we separate those, then we can just see it for what it is and make sure we're having a consequence that's related, teaches
Mhm.
responsibility, reasonable, and respectful. And 9 out of 10 times, yanking an iPad from the kids' weekend lineup or, taking away their phone for the weekend, it's not going to teach them the life skill to handle conflict with resolution. It's not going to teach them the life skill to respect the rules and you know, come home or sit still at the dinner table, whatever it is. Like, we want to actually be teaching the life skills that they're missing and finding logical consequences that teach. And that has to be related. And it's the same thing with bribery. Anytime we're using external controls, we're missing an opportunity to have our children learn how to do the life skill,
Yeah.
because external controls means we're always going to step in. So if you put your shoes on, you'll get an iPad in the car.
Mhm.
They're not learning just to intrinsically understand why you put your shoes on so you won't step on a bee, and you work as a team to get to preschool on time so you're not late for a circle lineup, right? They're learning that in order to get this technology time, I just do what I'm told.
Mhm.
And again, it's just, when we're looking at raising human souls, it's not what any of us want as parents. We want them to learn the life skill, working as a team, having self-motivation, intrinsic motivation that comes from
Mhm.
within instead of without, like externally. And that's what really leads to children thriving in their second decade, when they learn the self-regulation, self-control early on without someone overpowering or externally manipulating them into compliance.
Mm-hmm. So wholeheartedly agree with everything you just said. And when it comes to tech, the way we frame it for parents as well, because it's tricky, some families are more authoritarian, possibly, or more traditional, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe they use rewards and punishments, right? Which I don't in my family, but the way we frame it for tech is if you start to dangle and use tech in that way, it kind of makes it too special in that kid's life. Like, this thing is so special. Mom's going to take it away if I don't, comply perfectly, or it's so special. I'm going to work extra hard so I can get it right. Like, for us, we want tech to just be something we do. It's just something we do as a
Yeah.
tool, or maybe for entertainment. That's fine too. But it's part of everyday life. And by using it as a reward or punishment, we're actually making it more special than it needs to be. Right. So I'll add to that. I don't know if you agree with that, but that's definitely a way that something we add to that conversation of rewards and punishments, right? I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah. It's like, it's just, I love what I get from that is I love the tone of neutrality around
Yeah.
it, right? And again, what you're talking about is definitely moving into like, I know it's so special, so I know it's really going to hurt you when you don't have it. Like, that really is the tone of punishment. Like,
Yeah.
is because it's so special. But you're right. When there's like focus put on something, it often grows. And when
Yeah.
you have a more neutral tone to it of like, hey, I'm here to teach you how to use this tool and self-regulate with it. And if it's related to the misbehavior, sure, we might take a break from the iPad or the video
Yeah.
games for the weekend. Like, I have so many clients who, they're young boys, especially when they have siblings, they aggressively fight with each other. And they
Yeah.
also have violent video games in the house. And my students know I am constantly advocating, you got to get them out, you got to get them out.
Yeah.
But they know that, I first and foremost, I'm always going to advocate for those just to go away. I just don't believe children need them at all. But it makes sense that if you're watching something violent and then you have aggressive behavior with your siblings, of course, let's put the console away for a month, work
Right.
on the life skill of frustration tolerance when you lose a level or you feel like someone's cheating, then you can try again and bring it back.
Yeah.
That's more of a logical consequence model than a punishment model, which is
Yeah.
like, do it again and you're going to get this taken away. So
For
just to make
sure.
sure everyone understands that, there is absolutely times where it makes sense to
Yeah.
not have screen time when you come home from preschool, but it's more related to what is this, how is this going to benefit the child as they learn or self-regulate or take a nap. That is more what we're looking for than just the sting of
Yeah.
taking
But
it away or giving it.
but then it is a natural consequence. If it's related to the tech use, then that becomes a natural consequence, right? It's
Well,
not.
it's a logical. So logical is when we step in. Natural is like a natural consequence with tech is a little bit tough because that means it's like we're not stepping in. So like stepping on a
Mm,
bee if you don't wear your
right.
shoes is a
That
natural,
makes
right? The
sense.
world takes care of it.
Yeah.
Logical is like we step in, and that
Yes.
makes sense because it's related, right? But you're
Okay.
spot on as it's related. It's
Yeah.
just it makes sense.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
natural, I don't know, like natural consequences aren't great when the results or the consequences are too far away or they're not something we'd be willing to let happen. Like a
Mhm.
kid on Discord um stepping in and now he's getting bullied, right?
Yeah.
Because and we're like, well, that's the not like we wouldn't let that happen, right?
No.
So, but
And
so
we
natural
talk,
consequences in the tech world are a little bit tough to play with.
yeah, no, we talk about that all the time. There's actually mistakes in the real world are usually the stakes are much lower, right? Like, you say something, you do something in the real world. You step on a bee if you're a kid, or you say something that's maybe not appropriate to your friends. Like, your friends can
Yeah.
forgive you in a small group, your foot's going to heal. But when we amplify that online, it's just huge, so like, you're right, like, we
Yes.
almost can't let our kids have natural consequences with tech because the stakes are just way too high and the damages can be too high and be forever, honestly. You
Yeah.
say the wrong thing online, it's on your permanent digital footprint. So I
Oh,
agree, that's an
and
interesting point. I haven't even thought
the
about that.
bullying stuff is insane. I'm
Yeah.
like, guys, it's not worth it. Let your child experience the uncomfortableness of being the outcast. Because I'm telling you, it is awful. It's
Yeah.
awful. Like the middle school, throw it up on Snap, make fun of a kid and then share the messages everywhere. And if you've got a kid that's on these devices and on any of these platforms, their chance of mental health hits are so much higher. It's just not worth it.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything's supercharged. That's the word we like to use. It's like everything
Yeah.
that these things have always existed in the real world, but now you take it and turn it up to 100, 1,000, like you name the number. So you mentioned
Yeah.
social exclusion, and we've talked about it a couple times already. So I would love your tips on how parents can manage that social exclusion involved in
Oh, yeah.
smartphone and social media use. So it can be two different things. It can be when you're delaying, right? And you talked about that. It's so hard as a parent to watch your child go through that. But then you brought up the flip side of it, which is once they get it, the social exclusion almost becomes even more intensified, right? My thesis is that it's worse, and I've had many experts agree with me. So how do parents manage that, whether they've allowed it or they're delaying?
And tell me what you mean by once they get it, the social exclusion is worse. Tell
So
me a little bit
you were just
before I
talking
answer.
about this example of putting something up on Snapchat so everyone can see it, right? So if
Right.
you don't have the phone, you don't have the group chat, you don't have the social media, maybe you'll find out about that party or whatever happened on the Monday, and okay, it
Yeah.
might hurt a little bit. But if you do have it, you're now constantly
I see what
seeing
you mean. Yeah.
posts, videos, comments. You're
Yes.
publicly being excluded in a way that's visual and
Oh,
visceral, and to me much more intense than never knowing about it, right? So that's
so
what I'm getting at.
true.
I know.
Okay, I understand now. Yeah, well, it's like I feel like we could all just give each other a virtual hug right now and just
Yeah,
sob that this is the reality, right? And this is one of those when you asked that first question today is like, why is parenting so hard? Well, this is one of those things that is just one I think one of the as an emotional literacy coach, I teach parents and children how to feel emotions in a healthy way because that is being human. And sadness is one of those ones that we don't always get that many hits of sadness as parents. And when you see your child being like the only one, like for Stella, she was on an indoor beach volleyball team, they would have an hour and a half bus ride or van ride and she'd be the
yeah,
only kid and you would watch her drive away and just your heart, you so much sadness and just but sadness is an emotion that shows how much you care and
yeah,
we care so much about our children and it is tough to see them suffering, right? So it's just I think in that regard you do have to do nervous system regulation and healing work so you can become more comfortable with the uncomfortable.
yeah,
And that is parenthood when it comes to setting firm boundaries and being the outcast. You have to do your work to be to have confidence in your own decisions because we all know that we doubt ourselves so much as parents. And so make sure you have your own therapist, your own family life coach, whatever it may be, that you're in a strong parenting program because you're going to need support to make sure you believe in yourself. And then from there, you just want to meet a child with compassion and empathy and let them know how much they make sense and how you understand how hard this is for them. And and just continue to present the data and the information and let them know that you are first and foremost dedicated to their mental health and keeping them healthy, not just now I'm more going to speak to like the health and mental health side than the dangers. Like I know that the dangers
yeah,
exist with like, but for me, the big supercharged ticket is the mental health. Like
yeah,
as soon as these kids get these devices, it's like the can of worms is opened and it's like off to the races with battling the mental health stuff. So if you can just keep reminding them, this is our why, this is the yes behind our no, and what can I do to support you? Because I know this is going to be uncomfortable. You've got this bus ride, and I think I'm just coaching myself right now as I say this aloud is remembering to not make fun not I mean I won't say I make fun of but sometimes I'll say things in like an irritated way about the
yeah,
groups of children when I see them addicted to their phones
yes,
and I have to remember to speak about them just as in like, hey, I just want you to make sure you noticed the addiction. Like do you see how when your friends, this happened this summer, we were camping. We had 3 teenage boys with us, and he had a football game, and we had to take all the boys with us to the football game. And one kid had an iPhone. Was it 1 or 2? It might have been 2. And instead of watching Taryn play the game, it was like a 45-minute game, and then we were going back to camp at the beach. They all sat in the bleachers and watched, huddled around the phone. And
Oh,
so, you just remember to make sure you comment to your kids, hey, just want to make sure, did you notice that? That
yeah,
must be hard for them to not be able to be present. Where, it's their middle schoolers, 8th grade, there's girls around, but they miss it all because they were
yeah,
on their phone. They were, and so just continuing to remind them, I know this is hard. I'm here for you. What can I do to support you? It's okay that you're mad. It's okay that you're sad. And we are very firm about this.
yeah,
And one day, as you said, you will thank us.
yeah, yeah. Wow, that is such good advice. And it's just so hard. Like when you're talking, I'm feeling and I'm thinking about all those scenarios in my own world. My kids are a little bit younger.
Yeah.
But I love that you pointed out the non-judgmental thing because
Mhm.
to be honest, I probably inadvertently do that a little bit.
Me too.
Where,
Yeah.
maybe pointing out, did you see that? That's kind of weird or, whatever.
Yes.
And I'm talking about a kid, and that's not fair. That kid can't help what's going on. These things are so
Yeah.
alluring and everything else. But I love the idea of just noticing. Like, did you notice that? I think that's a really good tip. And then that also goes back
Yeah.
to building those skills, building critical thinking, right? Like you covered that earlier, is really observing, watching, connecting the dots. Like I think, we talk about being mindful, right, with tech use, and that's how we can have a healthy relationship. So just starting to notice what does healthy use look like without being judgmental, I think is a good skill for our kids too. And hopefully
Yeah.
validate some of the choices for the parents that are waiting for sure. And I
Yes.
do think like I said, I'm already seeing glimmers of hope of my son who's 11 noticing things on his own. So it was a tough
Yeah.
fifth grade. It was a tough year, but by 6, I think he's first of all realized it's not happening. Maybe gotten used to it a little bit, and maybe just matured enough to where he's starting to see the effects himself. So
Yep.
yeah, I mean, I would just say hang in there to those parents. I know I've
Yeah.
kept you so long already. Can I ask you one more thing? Because
Please. Yeah.
you brought up your nervous system, and I know that's
Yeah.
something you talk about a lot in your work. So um, there was a study last year, a 2023 study from JAMA, the Journal of American Medical Association, of adolescents. So it was over the course of 3 years. And so researchers found that kids who habitually check social media had changes in the parts of their brain that control social rewards and punishments. We talked about, that on an external basis, but I'm talking about it now from an internal basis, like as it relates to the child's brain. So, anyway, amongst the findings, the researchers found changes in the amygdala, so that's the fight or flight part of the brain. So how can parents that allow their kids to use social media help them regulate their nervous systems? Because basically the premise is it's basically activating this highly emotional, somewhat irrational part of their brain. So what would you say about that?
Oh my goodness. Well, I'm thinking of, so right now in our private membership, so we have a program called the Fresh Start Experience. We are doing a 4-month deep dive on nervous system regulation and healing for our students all over the world. And my daughter actually teaches the kids nervous system
Oh, nice.
regulation strategies. So that's kind of fun when you have younger kids, for them to realize. And I think, what she teaches them is more like when you feel like you're triggered and you might be reacting to your brother, or, and I love this question. I'm just kind of thinking about it. So I think it would be to make sure that you're teaching your children from a very young age, as early as possible, how to live in an embodied stance. So
Mhm.
meaning that you are listening to your body, right? Like you are realizing when you might have pain behind your eyes, or like I just got a new monitor. And I the first month, really, it took me to realize, and lighting too, that I was feeling like in a constricted, I was having a reaction. I was having a body reaction to like the light setup.
Hmm.
And it took me a while to realize, oh, I need to listen to my body, change the settings, because we're really good at just numbing out the body quite often and overpowering with like thought. And so
Yeah.
the earlier you can teach kids to understand what is happening inside of me, that
Yeah.
will guide me if I'm looking at something that I probably know I shouldn't, right? That I've been educated on that will have detrimental effects. Speaking of like porn with young men, but teaching them like how guilt will register in your body, right? Guilt is
Hmm.
different than shame. How once you like, if you feel like you've been playing video games for a while and you realize that you're snappy when your mom asks you to like come to the dinner table, right? Like starting to educate them that that's probably a bit of a nervous system response
Yeah.
of you're trying to focus, and to your nervous system is registering as danger when another human being is there to just engage with you and be a human being. And that's a signal that we probably need to tend to the nervous system, which is just tending to the body, which is
Yeah.
just turning off the device, right? But I
Hmm.
mean, this is a complex conversation, but the earlier you teach kids to start noticing what's happening and noticing their own behavior and their, like, especially their knee jerk responses, the thing that just comes to mind is that distracted, annoyed snappiness that happens if a
Yeah.
kid is on a device. Like,
Hmm.
that's something you could start teaching a kid very young. Hey, did you notice that?
Yeah.
Did you notice that when I asked you, you were a little snappy? You're not in trouble. I just want you to start realizing that to your nervous system, I am registering as a danger right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I love
Because
that.
safety for you is like this dopamine hits of the level that you're trying
Yeah.
to get to, and this outside like human. So that's just an example of how
Hmm.
that's why we have such strong limits on the devices, and why when we start to realize that's happening, we need to maybe take a break, go outside, source some nature, ride our bike, skateboard, and versus mom telling you you have to take a break. That's
Yeah.
like, that's kind of like what we're all trying to do, right? We're trying to teach kids from a young age, how do we get them to self-regulate versus being like, hey, you got 20 minutes, and when the timer goes off, you go outside and ride your bike. It's like, well, I also want you to start realizing when you're like dysregulated,
Yeah.
right? So I've never thought about that in regards to like the tech, but I'm going to think more about how we can support in that way, because it is definitely all tied together.
Yeah, I mean, tech, it's funny. It didn't really occur to me. I know the brain science and everything else, but I sat down with the CEO of Yonder. I don't know if you know who they are. They make pouches for
No.
schools, and they do phone free schools basically. And they'll do the events where you go to an event and you put your phone in a pouch, whatever. But he was the one that brought up this idea that technology is actually a physical thing and it taps into your nervous system, right? So that's like that study that I just talked about and everything
Oh,
else. So having a physical barrier, which is what Yonder does, kind of can stop the brain, right? When you feel the buzz, you want to grab your phone or whatever, but you do that a few times for a few minutes, it kind of breaks that flow. So I'm talking about self binding, which isn't in this conversation, but my point is that he did bring up, yeah, tech is very physical. It's a physical thing connecting to your nervous system. So it's going to affect everybody's nervous system, right? When you're using it. And it's really hard. I loved your message of like mindfulness and awareness, which is huge. But even then, I think even for adults, it's really hard to stop. Even though you
it
know it's bad
is.
for you, kids know they're not feeling good. But that's where sometimes I think parents can step in and just sort of help them understand that and help them turn it
Yeah.
off or whatever it is. But oh man, it's really really hard. So but
It
no, I
is. And just to do it without shame, right? So
yeah.
like if you can bring like, oh, I noticed yesterday I last night I didn't turn it off and then I didn't sleep well, or I
Yeah.
noticed that if I try to squeeze in some text messages while we're at the park and then you need me, I'm realizing that I feel annoyed answering you.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
that's an embodiment awareness
Yep.
of like you're going to feel constriction in your shoulders and your head,
Yep.
and it's like our body's way of saying, hey, maybe we shouldn't be multitasking text messages at the park, even though it feels so logical. Of
Yeah.
course we just need to get back to the nanny and tell
Sure.
the husband to put the chicken in the thing to de-thaw. Like it makes so much sense, but it's affecting our bodies and our
Yeah.
relationships. And so like, but the compassion to teach our kids, like there's nothing wrong with me. I'm not a bad mom because I was trying
No.
to, I'm
Yeah.
just learning how it's affecting me. And so are you, right?
Yep.
Like when I try to get you to come and you are snappy or you're not able to answer me, we're just building awareness as a
Yeah.
family. And then we have power to change our patterns if we want. But it's just awareness, it's without shame. And then that opens the door for kids to be a little bit more open to our suggestions.
Yeah, and I love in that scenario you gave, talking about being mindful of it as a parent too, and kind of relating to them on that level. Like, hey, this affects me too, and I know, and I'm sorry. I think that's really
Yeah.
strong too, right? Narrating that
Yeah.
and telling that story. Yeah. Well, Wendy,
Absolutely.
I've kept you so long. Thank you so much for everything. Your strategies are so practical, and I mean, obviously, you and I are in lockstep in terms of our philosophies and everything else. But I do think your approach does leave this very open for parents to kind of shape it and make it fit their parenting style too. So I think that's really, really good. So thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun to chat with a like minded soul. Thank you for the work that you're doing in the world. It means so much to me.
Thank you, Wendy.